Hello and welcome to the Middle East Institute's webinar on environmental cooperation between Israel and its neighbors, launching a new report. It has been co-authored by Dr. Ofir Witter, Dr. Maya Negev, and myself under the auspices of the Israeli Climate Forum, headed by President Yitzhak Herzog and directed by Dov Hanin, who is with us today. The paper published by MEI just a few days ago looks at trends and changes and developments in what's happening between Israel, Arab and Muslim states in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, relating to environmental cooperation. It identifies several trends after a conversation with about 10 governmental entities and ministries in Israel to map the current level of relationship and cooperation. It sees that environmental issues are becoming more and more discussed and engaged upon in the international community and in the Middle East and the Mediterranean in specific. It sees that the improvement of ties that happened in recent years, that is now under a question mark between Israel and its neighbors, has led Israel to become more involved in either bilateral engagement, regional configurations, dealing with environmental cooperative issues. And it sees that those cooperation endeavors that are happening on three levels. They are happening at the bilateral level between Israel and specific states in the region, like MOUs signed with the UAE or Morocco. It happened through minilateral configurations involving 3 or 4 countries, like the Israel-Morocco-EU water dialogue that was launched several months ago, or the Israel-Egypt-EU natural gas export deal. And they're happening on multilateral settings, like the Negev Forum, which is not convened recently, but is still a multilateral setting, and initiatives like the Cypriot government's Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East Climate Change Initiative that brought different countries together to discuss climate change and how to deal with that. So different framings in which Israel is gradually being involved in such regional endeavors. Some of those are slowing down recently because of the Israeli current government and the impact its policies has on Israel-Arab relationship, but still efforts to expand those cooperative endeavors that were launched, like the Israel-Jordan-UAE water electricity swap deal, and other efforts to expand that are still underway. And the international community, especially the US and the EU, we see has an interest in trying to make that happen, and we spell out in the report some recommendations on how that could be done. So the full report is available on the MEI's website, and we took the issue of the report and tried to bring it to a discussion with some leading experts that we have in the field. And with us today are 5 of those. Okay, we have Mohammed Mahmoud from the Middle East Institute, Director of the Climate and Water Program. Thank you for joining us. We have Dr. Dov Hanin, a former member of Knesset and Chairman of the Israel Climate Forum. We have Gideon Bromberg filling in for Yana Abu Talib, who had to cancel for personal issues, co-founder and Israel Director of EcoPeace Middle East. And we have Galit Cohen, former Director General of Israel's Ministry of Environmental Protection and currently head of the Climate and National Security Program at the INSS. We also have with us, not here in the Zoom screen, but with us in a pre-recorded session, Ambassador Gidon Bechar from Israel's Foreign Ministry, who is the Special Envoy for Climate Change and Sustainability, currently traveling in the region, but took our questions and answered them for us to see later on today. We'll be doing this as interactive as we can with rounds of questions and relatively short answers by our speakers. And I thank you all again for joining us and for being here and tackling this important issue. May I begin with you, Mohammed? And for setting the stage in a way, we are talking about Israel and its relationship with the neighbors, but let's begin with the neighbors and let's see how climate change is becoming an issue in Arab and Muslim countries. What trends do you identify in these countries when tackling the topic? How much there is more awareness, more action? Which are the countries that you think are taking a leading position in the region in tackling climate change effectively?
Thanks, Nimrod. I think just to really answer there's a short answer and a longer answer, not long, but longer answer. And I think the short answer is when it comes to climate response across the Middle East, it's not homogeneous. There's definitely differences between country to country, and even within each country, there's differences in terms of segments of society or function that experience or have capacity for climate response different. So certainly when we think of the governmental level, places like the UAE, and certainly with COP28 being hosted there at the end of the year, adds an extra limelight on them, have put forth initiatives, and certainly they're not the only country that put forth initiatives and goals in terms of how they want to address their climate mitigation targets, right? So there's a lot of targets across the world in terms of how do they reduce their carbon emissions. UAE has been a little bit more ahead of the ball in terms of putting some of those plans and frameworks out. Other countries have and also in terms of the government level or levels just government-like, there's been a lot of meetings and initiatives as well. So I think of Morocco as well, recently just had hosted the Mediterranean COP about a month ago, centered around countries around the Mediterranean in terms of their interests and priorities as it pertains to climate change, climate response. But then also below that, you have civil society. I would say across the region, civil society groups, particularly youth climate engagement groups, are very active. One that just pops in my head that I think is a good example is in terms of the youth Arab network that has, and there's multiple, I mean, there's a lot of civil society youth engagement groups. But again, there's differences, right? So certain countries are ahead of the curve in terms of what they're planning to do, in terms of what they've demonstrated as far as climate adaptation and climate mitigation projects. Others, not so much. And I think a lot of that has to do with access to financing and climate financing, and also what is more of a priority. Certainly when you think of the GCC countries, they're more on the energy side, they're more interested on the energy side. So climate mitigation tends to be higher on the agenda, whereas maybe other countries, for example, North Africa, Egypt, is being one of those examples that's maybe more interested in climate adaptation. And so therefore requires more access to funding to be able to start to implement adaptation projects, much like the Solar for Water deal, right? That's kind of a mix of both mitigation and adaptation. But for Jordan, the interest is on the adaptive side. How do you make your water resources and water management more resilient? Because water scarcity is a universal issue across the Middle East region. Not enough access to water, impact of climate change when it comes to drought, so forth. So the shorter answer is that it's not homogeneous across the region. And the differences lie on two fronts. One, access to financing, climate financing, to implement climate resilience projects and activities beyond just putting forth initiatives and plans and goals. And the other is what's the priority? Is it more on the adaptation side, which I think is the case for all the countries in the region, or others that have a role to play in the mitigation side because of how much they are a part of sort of the energy equation when it comes to mitigation.
Thank you. Let's turn to you, Dov. And first, ask whether you see a similar trend in Israel when it comes to climate change. Is there a growing awareness to the topic? Is it going high on the priority list? And more specifically, you are the director and the one who is leading the Israel Climate Forum, which is quite a unique establishment that our president launched. So can you say a few words about what it is, what it has achieved in the time it has been operating? And do you see it as an effective model of intersectoral cooperation on climate? Because it does bring people from different walks of life in the Israeli society, from different sectors. Is it something that you think other countries can replicate or can use as a model?
Well, thank you, Nimrod. Thank you for inviting me for this very, very important event, dealing with an important issue in very challenging period. The Israeli Climate Forum is the initiative of our president, President Herzog. Now, for our American listeners, it is very, very important to realize that in Israel, the president is very different from the president in the United States. The president in Israel is not the government. He does not lead the actual government activity of the administration. He's not the parliament. He cannot, write laws. He's not the Supreme Court. He cannot, provide rulings that everyone should obey. So what is the place of the president? President can lead processes. This president has soft power, which can turn to be very, very important in a society like Israel, especially in times of crisis. And in Israel, the president actually, not only on issues of climate, found himself in a very central position in the complicated issues and processes happening in Israeli society. And when he began his term of office, he said that he will put a climate crisis high above in his agenda. And the creation of the Israeli Climate Forum is a translation of this commitment into reality. Now, the Israeli Climate Forum is, as you said, a very unique structure of cooperation that involves people from government agencies, civil society, academy, local government, economic organizations. But while we do have, as part of our members, people coming from government, we are completely independent. So on the one hand, we closely work with government authorities, but parallelly, we criticize the government whenever we think it is necessary and important. For example, as you all know, in Israel, there is a very first debate at the moment about legal changes that the government pushes ahead. And we, as the Climate Forum, the leading figures in the Climate Forum wrote to the president a very detailed paper speaking about the concerns connected with the changes the government want to put through on issues of environment and climate. So we cooperate with the government, but we also can criticize it. There are more than 300 people involved in the work of the Climate Forum. They are organized in 8 different clusters, and each cluster is centered on a topic like energy or education, or, which is relevant to our meeting here, a cluster that deals with regional cooperation and security. Now, issues of regional cooperation and security are extremely important for dealing with climate crisis, and they are also very high in the personal agenda of President Herzog. He spoke about a vision of renewable Middle East. It is very, very challenging vision. It's not really easy to get there, but it is a challenge that all of us should put before ourselves, and I'll be happy to speak a bit more about it perhaps in the next round of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dov. And we move to you, Galit, because we are moving from the president to the government. And you have been serving for many years working on governmental issues related to climate, but most recently were serving as the Director General at the time in which Bennett and Lapid were heading the Israeli government, at a time in which many of the cooperation projects that we spell out in our report actually were initiated and were launched. So can you share with us a bit from your experience heading this important ministry in what you achieved to launch in terms of Israel-Arab or Israel-Muslim cooperation on environmental issues? What were the keys to success? Which lessons do you take? And maybe what you didn't succeed? And if you want to say a word about what's the consequence of what's happening now in Israel on the project that you launched, you are welcome to do that as well.
Sorry. So thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. Let's start with those that we sign in agreements with. Let's start with Jordan. So Jordan, first time since the peace treaty, environmental agreement was signed between the governments of Israel and Jordan on the cooperation in ecological restoration and sustainable development of the Jordan River. And it was so important to us. The agreements includes pollution treatment and prevention, and also water addition, climate change preparedness and promotion of sustainable agriculture and tourism around the area of the Jordan River. Since the first one, the second one I would like to also speak about is the Cyprus initiative. Although it wasn't the Israeli initiative, but we were very, very involved in. Remember myself in one of those in New York summits. I think it was a climate summit, and spoke with the minister of Cyprus, who came to me and said, yes, we have a cooperation, we have something new to this. And we said, yes, we are in, and you can take Israel in. So the cooperation led by the government of Cyprus between all the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean, including those countries that we don't have, Israel don't have any diplomatic relations. So it was very, very interesting for us, in the framework of which a declaration was signed to promote regional cooperation in the field of climate change preparedness, and based on science and research. It was most of it with the academy. We had also the Cyprus, Greece and Israel trilateral cooperation for the treatment of the sea pollution, also around climate. And of course, the UAE and Bahrain, the memorandum of understanding that for cooperation that we sign in. I would like also to mention the Desertec, the establishment of the Desertec. It's an international innovation center for climate change, with emphasis on resilience in arid and semi-arid areas. Desertec is a unique meeting point for industry, policy, and academia to co-concrete effective approaches in multi-stakeholder actors in environment. The center is established in Beersheba, and it will promote cooperative action across national governments, local municipalities, academic institutions, health facilities, industry, and regional cooperation. And I'm very happy to say that there is a lot of activities already with countries around us, and even more than that in Africa. Now they have the Green Belt in Africa, a lot of, so this is also something that we initiated from the government to bring more cooperation. And when I spoke about it first, it was 2019, and it was before the Abraham Accords. And I said to everybody, don't look only to the West and North. Let's look to the East and South. This is our region, and there is so many potential here together with our neighbors. And then we had the Abraham Accords, and the rest is history. So we promote it very much. What I want to say, even those that unfortunately with our Palestinian neighbors, we could not, or we didn't reach a lot of cooperation. Even though it was, I think, even first time after a lot of years, more than 10 years, even more, that we had a meeting between our ministers, the Minister for Environmental Protection from the Israeli side and also from the Palestinian side, and also with other ministers. So it was the first time we spoke. It was very, very nice meeting. And I was so excited. I said, yes, now we will have something together with us. And we had we have a lot of budget for those projects that we spoke about, most of it for waste management, collection, and recycling, and so on. But unfortunately, we didn't reach it. So I want to say that still I'm very optimistic, and I think there is a lot of room for cooperation. And even though it's very, very difficult, we cannot give up. And we have the umbrella, the government umbrella, and we have to take it and push it more. So thank you, Angelia.
Thank you, Galit. And your points emphasize just how much, when looking at the region, also from a Mediterranean lens, not only a Middle Eastern one, it is possible to bring Israel and some countries with which it's at odds on the same table. We saw it, the Cypriot initiative that you mentioned, bringing your minister at the time, Tamar Zandberg, with the Lebanese colleagues sitting around the same table at COP. I think that was very significant. And you also mentioned the difficulty to promote cooperation with the Palestinians on the governmental level, which takes us to you, Gideon Bromberg, because in civil society it may be more possible, and you're practicing it in your organization, which is a shared Israeli-Palestinian-Jordanian NGO, which is a very unique model, succeeding a lot on issues of environment. So when you look at civil society, do you think that civil society can really do more on environmental cooperation in the region than what governments can do? And maybe as an example, look at what EcoPeace accomplished with the Prosperity Project, this solar and water deal that was already mentioned. It's an example of the impact that you can have, taking an idea from the civil society space to actual implementation on the governmental level.
So thanks, Nimrod, for the opportunity to present and for the very good question. I don't think that civil society can in any way replace government. The involvement of the governments is critical to actually see improvement take place on the ground. But civil society can play a critical role in facilitating discussions between all sides, and particularly cross-border organizations where the membership is not from one country, but from a number of countries, or from the relevant countries where the cooperation is being promoted, then, and that is the case of EcoPeace, then I think we have a real opportunity to advance an understanding as to why cooperation on the environment, on climate, on water issues serve national interests of each side. Because the strength of the advocacy of a regional environmental organization such as EcoPeace is that once we work out the details of plans, and I'll give the example, of course, of the Water Energy Nexus Agreement, once we detail those plans, those ideas, we establish the environmental, the economic, the geopolitical rationale behind them, then it's the Israeli office that leads the efforts vis-a-vis the government of Israel, the Palestinian office vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority, the Jordanian office vis-a-vis the government of Jordan. So it's Israelis speaking to Israelis, Palestinians to Palestinians, and Jordanians to Jordanians, and that helps overcome, to some degree, the initial hurdle of Israelis speaking to Palestinians or Jordanians trying to speak to Israelis. And the Water Energy Nexus is a very good example. A research project that EcoPeace launched in 2017, that we were trying to look at the example of coal and steel of Europe and ask, well, what's the coal and steel? What could be the coal and steel that helped bring prosperity to Europe after World War II in the midst of a climate crisis that could help bring climate mitigation and adaptation, and of course, climate security to our own region. And we, through this study, identified that one mechanism could be by harnessing the sea through proven Israeli technology of desalination, and harnessing the sun through solar energy development. And what our study further showed was that, well, there are comparative advantages here, that Israelis and Palestinians on the Mediterranean have the comparative advantage to produce desalinated water at scale and at price that Jordan could only dream of, because of the proximity of the Mediterranean to all the major population centers, Israeli, Palestinian, or Jordanian. And on the other hand, Jordan, with its vast desert areas, had the comparative advantage of producing, and the proven record of producing renewable energy at price that Israelis and Palestinians could only dream of, and at scale because of Jordan's vast desert areas. Now, we presented that these possibilities to our different governments, to our three governments, and we saw interest. We saw lots of challenges as well, and we had to deal with those challenges. The government of Israel at the time, under the Netanyahu government, was coming and saying, well, but why would we want to be dependent on an Arab state? And of course, the Jordanians were coming and saying, why would we want to be more dependent on water from Israel than we already are? And by creating a mechanism of healthy interdependency, where each side is somewhat dependent on the other, and it's not a single form of dependency, we're able to move forward. But we did more than that. We tried to attract the financing, and we presented this program in Brussels, in New York, but also in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And in the end, it indeed was an Emirati company that stepped forward first and said, this is amazing, and we want to move forward. And then with the signing of the Abraham Accords, within 6 months, a letter of intent is signed between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE under the auspices of the US administration with John Kerry. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to include the Palestinians at this stage, but we are still hopeful, and we see that there is self-interest here at stake, and the possibility to indeed broaden the arrangements that have already been made, that I think Mohammed spoke, that builds not only climate adaptation, but climate mitigation, and speaks to a broader ability to promote region-wide climate security.
Thanks, Gideon. And it's interesting to see how civil society is stepping up its work on climate issue. Your example is the best because you're the first in the ground. But we say later on, organizations that work on climate issues from different perspectives going regional, and organizations that were going regional on other issues going climate. So now we see more and more organizations in this field, and I think that's a very good development. Speaking as one of these organizations back in Israel that didn't deal with climate initially, that moved into this space as things became real, and your guidance in leading the way was very important. We are now going back to the government, but to the official diplomacy, and we'll be hearing my Q&A with Gideon Bechar, Ambassador Gideon Bechar from the Israeli MFA, who again is not here with us because of a diplomatic mission, but was pre-recorded a short while ago. So let's hear Gideon. Ambassador Gideon Bechar, as Israel's special envoy for climate change and sustainability at the Foreign Ministry, you've been among the first ones speaking about the need to advance climate diplomacy and regional climate resilience. Can you explain us briefly what do these concepts mean today, and what should Israel and its neighbors do together to advance them? And more broadly, perhaps, what is the role of climate change at all in shaping Israel's foreign policy?
Thank you very much, Nimrod, for this conversation, which enables us to speak of a highly important issue. As you know very well, the Middle East is a climate hotspot. It means that it warms up twice as much as the world average. Not only that, the Middle East is very prone to the effects of climate change. It's a very dry area. It suffers from water scarcity. It has very little resources in terms of water, agriculture, forests, natural habitats, etc. And on the other hand, the population in the Middle East is a quite big one. We are talking in North Africa and the Middle East about 500 million people already living in this area, with an expectation of this population to rise much more in the near future. All of that creates a very heavy toll on the resources, the limited resources of the region, and the effects of climate change, which are already felt in the region in many dramatic ways, will increase in the future. Now, we know that in order to prepare ourselves better for climate change, we must also develop a regional outlook and a regional preparedness plan. It is not enough that each country in the region will have its own national adaptation plan. Something is missing. We need to work together in order to create regional resilience to climate change. What does it mean exactly? It means that the countries in the region will be sufficiently ready for the lack of water, the negative impacts of climate change on food production, on agriculture, that the countries of the region will have higher rates of renewable energy production, that the countries of the region will be able to protect their natural habitats, their ecosystems, etc. We cannot do that alone. It's not enough that a country, it doesn't matter how strong it is, will be able to face off climate change risks, and its neighbors will not be so, because the effects will spill over. There will be probably immigration from countries affected by climate change to the others which are prepared for climate change. There might be instability in some countries, even security instabilities that will spill over to other countries. So the whole idea is that we have to strengthen the region as a region. I'll just give you an example. Sea level rise is one of the most imminent dangers to the Middle East. We are talking today at the Eastern Mediterranean on sea level rise of about 0.5 centimeter per year. I repeat it, 0.5 centimeter per year. This is dramatic. It is accelerating. We know that sea level will reach 0.5 meter within the mid-century and more than 1 meter by the end of the century. And this has huge impacts on all the countries that have coastlines, practically almost every country in the region. So it makes only sense that we work together to share data, to share information, to create models, to share best practices, how we can prepare ourselves for sea level rise, and create a regional plan that will save lots of resources, lots of money, and will protect all of us much better. And this is only one example. Other examples are the examples of creating new water resources in the Middle East, new sources of renewable energy, that we should strengthen together our food security in the region. These are all musts. We cannot avoid them. And climate diplomacy is the tool to move forward in the creation of this regional resilience to climate change.
Thank you, Gideon. And you mentioned a lot the need for regional cooperation. And we see that in recent years, Israel is becoming a member of several regional mechanisms that are dealing directly or indirectly with issues of climate and the environment, all kind of multilateral and unilateral mechanisms. Can you say which ones do you see as the most important for Israel and its neighbors to be moving forward? What are their current impact and the future potential? And in light of the vision that President Herzog introduced of a renewable Middle East, do you think there is a need for some new regional inclusive mechanism that manages to bring all countries of the region together despite political differences for joint action on climate change?
Well, we must cooperate regardless of political issues, which happen a lot in this region. And only by working together and cooperating with all actors that we can prepare ourselves for the dangers of climate change. I can tell you that the Abraham Accords really opened wide gates for cooperation between Israel and its neighbors in the region, including on issues related to climate change. They have enabled us to create the Negev Forum, which is a regional framework of cooperation with several working groups. One of them is on food security and water. So this opens or creates official mechanism for cooperation in the region. We are also part of a Cypriot initiative for climate change in the Eastern Mediterranean and the climate change led by Cyprus, which is an excellent initiative. which encompasses countries in the Middle East, as well as Cyprus and Greece. And this enables us to create more cooperation and also to bring international actors into the region, like the European Union. We need the international activity of players here, like the European Union, the United States, the UN, to support the countries in the region, to prepare ourselves for climate change. Some of the countries here are very weak one, or countries with limited resources, and international assistance is very much needed. There are also other forms of cooperation. There is regional cooperation, like the agreement on which is called Prosperity Green and Blue. The idea is that Israel will supply Jordan with 200 million cubic meters of desalinated water and will buy renewable energy from Jordan. The United Arab Emirates is part of this project. The United States is supportive of this project, and Special Envoy John Kerry is involved in facilitating the agreement between the different partners. The idea behind it, and this is really a good example how we can turn lemons into lemonades. And the idea is that Jordan suffers a lot from water scarcity, but Israel has become a regional superpower in desalinating water. The Mediterranean Sea is much closer to the urbanic centers of Jordan, so we can supply Jordan quite easily with water from the Mediterranean Sea. On the other hand, Israel is a small country without sufficient area to create enough solar energy for its needs, while Jordan is much bigger than Israel and has open space that can enable Jordan, with the help of the United Arab Emirates, to create solar projects in its territory and then export the solar power to Israel that we need quite a lot. So this is a regional cooperation that we see in the making. In the last COP, in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we have signed a letter of intent with Jordan to rehabilitate the southern Jordan River. So this is another example how we can work together. We see more and more cooperation like that in the region. And we see also cooperation coming from the private sector and civil society, not only from governments. And this is important, and we encourage it. We think that in the long run, we should strengthen the mechanisms that exist and create new ones. For instance, a preparedness plan for sea level rise in the Mediterranean Sea, a preparedness plan for heat waves in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. As we are speaking, we are suffering from a serious heat wave in Israel and the region, and we know that these kinds of events will happen more and more with more severe consequences. Another issue that calls for regional cooperation is dust storms or sandstorms, which become very frequent in the Middle East, with huge impacts on the health of the population, on transportation, on agriculture, on water resources, etc. And only this is a good example that only with regional cooperation we can prevent them or reduce the risks coming from them. So just to conclude that climate change doesn't leave us much options. We really have to take the opportunities that are opening now for closer cooperation because we depend on one another when it comes to climate change. We need international assistance in that will help to facilitate agreements, will facilitate cooperation, and will put resources into the region.
Ambassador Bahar, it's very encouraging to hear about these different mechanisms. I also recall that last year you were participating in the first UN Middle East and North Africa Climate Week taking place at the UAE. We know there is an upcoming one in the fall in Saudi Arabia, and I hope you will be able to take part in that as well. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us, for your insights, and for contributing to this discussion.
Thank you very much. Toda rabba and shalom to all of you.
In the first round of our conversation, we spoke about the current realities and the current mechanisms. We will be trying to speak a bit in the future-oriented outlook to see what can be done. And I begin with you, Muhammad. When you hear all of that, the Israeli interest and the mapping of Israeli initiatives and looking at it a bit from the outside, what do you think are the spaces in which Israel and its neighbors could try and move forward and cooperate in, given all the political tensions and problems we know about? And specifically because we are holding this discussion in Washington at a time when President Herzog is just about to meet President Biden this week, what should be the role of the US in trying to help such cooperation evolve?
Good question, but I don't think there's an easy answer on part of it, but I think there's an easier answer on the other part of it. What I mean by that is the how do you facilitate the cooperation part may not be as straightforward, but I think it may be easy to identify avenues of engagement and collaboration. For me, obviously, the big thing now that's taking the headlines is the resource exchange deals, right? Certainly the resource exchange deal it's popped up in our conversation in terms of cooperation with Jordan and vis-a-vis also overlaying that cooperation with the UAE to help facilitate that deal in terms of the solar for power. You can also argue resource deals have existed. I mean, certainly with Jordan in terms of how to conjunctively manage the Jordan River in terms of the amount of water that's allocated between the countries and so forth. And I think that those happen by necessity, certainly when you think of shared waterways. But one of the, I think, big areas that I'll call it an export potentially to neighboring countries is technology and advancements in technology. And I think there's two areas, objectively speaking, that I think Israel has really kind of dialed in for a very long time, and I think could be of use and benefit, maybe formally. I think informally, some of that technology has been exported to other parts of the world through businesses and sort of commercially. But I think can certainly be co-opted as a way to be shared formally with other countries. How that happens, I can speculate and give some ideas, but I think the two areas that jump to mind that I think are high priority from a natural resource perspective. One is on desalination. Certainly since 2005, I mean, Israel has kind of really dialed in terms of desalination being, and much like some of the other countries, most of the other countries in the region have recognized that that's a critical water augmentation source, recognizing the water scarcity conditions that the region faces, and now is even more exacerbated because of the overlay of climate change, enhancing droughts, reducing for surface water systems, reducing the amount of water that's generated at the headwaters, but also putting stress on other existing groundwater sources, which are finite. So we turn to the oceans for desal. So I think there's a long history, not just of desalination use, but also how do you make that process more efficient in terms of energy usage, in terms of extracting more water out of what is more fresh water, I should say, or more usable water out of what is being desalinated. So I think that's certainly one area of technology export that I think could be part of a collaborative deal or exchange, if you will. The other area, again, I focus on water not just because it's my bread and butter and I care about it, but I think it's almost the low-hanging fruit here because of how critical it is for the region in terms of resource, and so therefore, to me, seems an easy road for cooperation, collaboration. Gidon may agree. I mean, that's a lot of what EcoPeace also focuses on besides environmental. The other on the water efficiency side is looking at agricultural water use efficiency. I know that there's been a lot of technologies developed in Israel in terms of improving that aspect of water use. I know, for example, one of the organizations I've interfaced with in the past is NDRIP, that have exported a lot of their agricultural water use efficiency to the Western United States, where I'm actually currently at, because of similar climates. They have similar sort of water issues, drought conditions, etc., where improving not just the technology of drip irrigation, which is almost a necessity at this point in our region because of our water scarcity, but doing that even more efficiently, which for most is probably hard to think. Drip seems more efficient already compared to certainly flood irrigation, which a lot, surprisingly, certain parts of the Middle East still use flood irrigation or even sprinkler irrigation. So drip is efficient in comparison, but they've evolved and utilized technologies to make even drip more efficient. And the reason I bring agricultural water use is, as probably we all are aware, that is the highest percentage of water use out of the sectors of water use. About 60-70% of water use on average per country, and certainly I think when you average it globally, goes towards agricultural water use for food production. And so if we're able to improve the efficiency of the water application there, that pays huge dividends in terms of available water supply from the finite or limited sources that are already available, right, across the region because of our arid conditions. And again, there's, like I said, there's technologies there that could be part of some type of exchange with other countries in the region. The second part, which I'll try to begin to answer, but I'll leave it to others here that are more familiar with how to make these deals happen. But for me, I think once you have this type of technology available, certainly I think that's attractive. It's just a matter of determining for an exchange type of agreement what is useful on the other side, right? And that's a question for more experienced people than me to answer. But I will posit one idea or concept that I think, maybe not in terms of a transactional side of an agreement, but I think could demonstrate goodwill to potentially encourage such an agreement, which is, can we show a regional proof of concept or somewhat local proof of concept through something like EcoPeace to apply such types of technologies in the Palestinian territories, in Jordan, in areas where there is already an interface with Israel. And I think just in terms of sort of goodwill, that could go a long way towards facilitating an actual longer formal agreement with other countries. And I think all countries would benefit from this type of technology, but I would argue and say Palestinian territories are in dire need of these types of potential improvements for their own water challenges as well. The other thing I would say is also to go back, I think the last part you posited, Nimrod, on the role the US can play. I mean, certainly the US can encourage this type of collaboration. I don't know, just the way it's sort of the politics of the Middle East have shifted recently. And again, I'm not a political person here, but you know, the role that China has played in facilitating some of the new relationships or evolving relationships in the region. I don't know if the US's role is as necessary. I mean, certainly there's a part to play. I would almost argue that just using the template of what happened with the UAE, that some of these engagements and collaborations can happen independent of a third party outside of the region. I think once you demonstrate, number one, the value of the resource exchange, in this case, I'm suggesting the technologies that already exist in Israel because of sort of they're ahead of the curve in the research and development in those types of technologies. And then showing the, like I said, local proof of concept, regional proof of concept, not just in Israel, but in other countries, in the most immediate countries in areas like Palestine and or Jordan, to show that how it could work outside of Israel in other countries that have other sort of implementation challenges to be able to adopt and mainstream these types of technologies.
Thank you. And I move over to you, Dov, and want to speak with you about the Palestinian issue. Because when we are talking about regional cooperation, at least some of us in Israel also envision Israeli-Palestinian peace. And we want to expand cooperation with the Palestinians, given all the difficulties that were mentioned here before. I think my question has two sides. First, how do you expand cooperation with the Palestinians when political situation is as bad as it is now, and when there's opposition on both sides to actually working together, among some at least? And the flip side of that is what happens to regional cooperation when tensions with the Palestinians are mounting. So how much what is happening on the Israeli-Palestinian track impact, limits, what could be done on the Israeli-Arab or Israel-Muslim track?
Well, let me begin, Nimrod, with the second part of your question, and I want to say it very, very bluntly. To my mind, regional cooperation without the Palestinians cannot really exist. Both in geographical terms, Palestine is part of the region. There is Israel, Palestine, Jordan. You cannot just, put the Palestinians in the box, close the box and say, or close the drawer and keep them there. So both geographically and because of political realities, you cannot create real and deep and stable regional cooperation without including the Palestinians. Now, this is extremely complicated because we have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a very, very bitter one. And at the moment, the prospects are not really very hopeful for a quick solution of this conflict. However, I think that all of us should understand that we cannot ignore the political conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian political conflict. We cannot evade it. But at the same time, we cannot also ignore climate crisis. Climate crisis will not wait till we finish all our problems. So we should find ways to parallelly deal with the political conflict and with climate crisis. The formula I put before the president is that we should find ways to really solve the conflicts of the 20th century in order to really deal with the challenges of the 21st century. Now, this is very, very essential for all of us to understand. We do have existential crises as climate crisis in the 21st century. In order to really deal with it, we should find ways to overcome and to solve the existing political conflicts. Now, speaking about how this can be translated into reality, let's speak, for example, about water, continuing the line of Muhammad, who spoke before me. The Palestinians have a acute problem of water scarcity, while Israel has great desalination possibilities or abilities. So Israel should find a way to deal with the water scarcity of the Palestinians. Let us speak about Gaza, which is a disaster area, speaking in terms of climate and environment. Now, environment do not have borders. When disaster happens in Gaza, there will be implications in Israel. So preventing such a disaster, climatic and environmental crisis in Gaza is also a national interest of Israel and Israelis. That is something that all of us should really understand. In Israeli Climate Forum, we try to support initiatives. Perhaps Gideon will say a few words about one of these initiatives. I'll mention it in one sentence, of Israel allowing the Palestinians to have solar systems established in Area Cs in the West Bank, areas that Israel actually managed till now. It is the majority of the territory of the West Bank is under this system of Area C. So the idea is that Israel will allow the Palestinians to create solar energy in Area C in order to create electricity that can be also provide some answers to the problems of Gaza, of the needs of Gaza Strip in electricity. I spoke briefly about water. One very important issue in speaking in regional dimension is of course the issue of food security. Food security is a real challenge in our whole region. I hope that President Herzog will discuss this issue both with President Biden and with Vice President Kamala Harris, and I hope that something operational will come of these discussions. But we believe that the issue of food crisis or food security is an important issue that should be dealt on regional dimension, with the abilities of Israel being included in order to deal with this very, very important and urgent crisis.
Thank you. Galit, we are heading towards another future event, which is COP in the UAE. And you are very much involved in your current former position in the preparations of the Israeli government towards the previous COP, and you are probably following what's happening now as reports are telling about like 1,000 Israelis will be flocking to the UAE to take part in the conversations or the conference over there. But, you know, as Israelis, we also want to learn from the region. It's not only about bringing our added value to the region, but also looking at our neighborhood and seeing what we can learn from them. So what do you think Israel can learn the most from its neighbors? And how can we really leverage this opportunity of having COP in the region with a significant Israeli participation to make that learning moment more significant?
So two issues I would like to mention for your question. First is the technology innovation, and the second one is the supply chains. So for the first one, what Israel can learn from their neighbors, first and most important for innovative technologies, it's the identification of the needs. And if we want to provide and we want to even create together innovative technology regarding climate issues, we have to identify what is the needs. And needs is also about the habits, even health issues that is very similar to in our region. It's not just the Israeli citizen, it's all the neighbors countries. It's the same, DNA even. So it's the same health issues. So if they have to deal with the climate, heat waves or any climate change phenomena, so this is something that we can learn together. And we can create together, identify what is our needs, and then thinking together about the innovative technology for the solutions. And then it's not a solution just for our neighbors in our region. It's also for those countries that facing now much, much more desertification, much more drier areas, less water, and so on. So this is something that we can share together, thinking about ourselves and bringing the exactly identification of the needs, then creating those technology and then sharing it, not just in our neighbors countries, but also all in all the world, I think, and all those places facing more and more drier areas. So what we can do, we can study together, we can share information, data, science. This is something, we are now working in Israel on vulnerable risk maps from climate. this is something that we can create together. There is a lot of knowledge, and we cannot, have those solutions just in Israel inside. We need to understand what is going on in all the region and create this vulnerable climate risk maps, not just for Israel, for all the region. And this is something that we can do together. So it's not just creating a technology together, we can also share information and creating the understanding of the needs from the perspective of understanding the vulnerability areas for climate. And of course, the citizens that are most vulnerable in our countries. So this is one aspect that we can share together, we can work together toward to the climate summit, to the COP28. The second issue I would like to raise here is the climate supply chains disruption. Would like to mention that this is one of the projects that we are now initiating at the INSS, and thinking about the disruption that already exists from climate change to all the raw materials, commodities, and so on. We know that we face it here in Israel, but we face it all over the world. And of course, that if we will face it all over the world and in Israel, probably all the rest countries in our region. And thinking about how we can, solve this problem, but to understand that in our region that food security, water security is so important, and it's a matter of stability, stability of the region. So if we want to ensure that, we must ensure that we will have the commodities will continue, the raw material for food, even for the food sector, will continue to come in economical price to our region, to Israel and our region. And what we would like to understand in our research now about the disruption of supply chains is what is the disruption, the climate disruption to the supply chains for the food sector, from the place it's produced, shipping all the way to the country, and thinking together how we can prepare and prevent the risks that could occur, here in Israel, but in all the region. And one element that all the rest of the countries manage to reduce the risks in supply chains is to reduce the longest of the supply chains, which means to be much more, let's say, working together in the region, and not just to be much more dependent in very long supply chains and those commodities that came from a very long distance. To reduce the distance, it means much more cooperation between all the countries around us. And this is from one part. And from another alternative is also, if we are looking about the market in our place, in our region, we can be a very strong market for the suppliers when we want to make sure that we will have those commodities, ensure the commodities coming to Israel and all the region. It's not just Israel, a very small market. This is all the market all around us, and it's a strong market, and we can negotiate and make sure that those commodities will come, to make sure that they will come to Israel and to the region too. So I hope that in the side event that we are planning to have in the COP, we'll have representatives from countries in the regions speaking together, and how we can create this regional market to deal and manage and prevent the risks from the supply chains, from supply chains to the food market, and it could be also to other commodities to this region. So I hope that we will have this very fruitful discussion there, and all the countries together, and dealing with this disruption of supply chains that we face much more those days. Yes, the Middle East is changing, but all the world is changing. The deglobalization phenomena together with the climate change, this is something that could be very risky, but if we will prepare ourselves and together with all the countries, we can gain from it.
Thank you, Galit. We'll be curious to hear after COP how it went. Good luck. And a final question to you, Gidon, because speaking about regional cooperation for Israel is nice, but we know where the public is in the region, and the public in the Arab world, in Muslim countries, does not support that or vastly opposes cooperation with Israel, also on issues that bring benefits to both sides. I think you at EcoPeace are the best to sense it, because you're having a Palestinian leg and a Jordanian leg, an Israeli one. So how do you see the sentiments towards cooperation with Israel? Are they changing in light of what's happening, for good or for worse? And how much of an impact they make on official decision by governments on whether to engage with Israel or not?
So the sentiments are not changing. I think the sentiments are getting worse, because we're not solving the conflict. And back to Dov's earlier comment, we have to solve the conflict. And we're never going to achieve the climate security that we need without solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And if that is not clear to decision makers in Israel and elsewhere, then they're keeping their head in the sand, because we cannot achieve regional climate security without solving conflict issues. That doesn't mean that we need to wait. And the work of EcoPeace is trying to bring that message home, that the climate crisis means that the love that we all claim to, the land that we all claim to love, won't be worth living in if we don't advance cooperation to meet that climate crisis. And through cooperation on climate issues, build trust to help solve the very clear political issues, and from certainly the perspective of EcoPeace, to help advance the two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace. We think that no side is doing a favor to the other by cooperating on these issues, and all governments, the government of Palestine, the government of Jordan, and the government of Israel equally need to educate, need to explain and state quite plainly to our publics that cooperation on this issue is first and foremost an issue of national security, that the future of the state of Israel or the future of the Palestinian people is at stake if we don't cooperate on these issues. The Water Energy Agreement is an example where, despite the fact that the public in Jordan in large numbers came out and protested and publicly stated that we would rather die of thirst than drink water purchased from Israel, the government, of course, is not allowing that to happen, has no interest, because people will die of thirst if we don't cooperate on these issues. And similarly, Israelis and Palestinians must understand that cooperation on these issues is not doing a favor. If I have a little bit of time, the situation, I think, Dov spoke to the dire situation in Gaza. So, back in, until last summer, close to 108 million liters of raw sewage was flowing out of Gaza into the Mediterranean Sea every day. And that was largely due to the inability to get cement into Gaza, because cement was seen as a substance that Hamas was using to build tunnels to attack Israel. Well, without cement going into Gaza, no sewage treatment plants could be built in Gaza. And without sewage treatment plants, the result is sewage flowing into the Mediterranean, also closing down desalination plants in Israel. And Ecopeace actually released the information that the Ashkelon desalination plant was being intermittently closed down, threatening 15% of Israel's drinking water. That's how important desalination is. One desalination plant is 15% of the country's drinking water. By highlighting the national security interest at stake, cement starts to flow into Gaza. Today, 3 modern sewage treatment plants are operating in Gaza, but there still isn't sufficient electricity to operate those sewage treatment plants 24/7. And that's why allowing the Palestinians to build their own solar energy supply in Area C is not just a Palestinian interest, it's also an Israeli interest. We're in the same boat. We're in the same sea, and our boat will sink. It will overturn. Whether, my Palestinian director often describes us as being the Titanic. There are some and she'll often say the Israelis are first class and the Palestinians are down there third class. But when that iceberg hits, and that's what the climate crisis is, the boat sinks. And it doesn't matter whether you're first class or third class, you all drown. We must avoid getting there. It's the responsibility of civil society, of academia, but also of our governments to be frank and straightforward with our public. We can't afford to allow this iceberg to hit.
Gideon, thank you. We had several questions, but actually we answered them. People were asking about the Biden-Herzog conversation. They were asking about the Palestinian issue. They were asking about implications of what's happening in Israel and regional development. So more or less, we covered most of the issues. And I really thank you. And I think what was striking in this conversation and what I would like to thank you for is the optimism that you sparked, the focus that you put on opportunities for cooperation while not ignoring the difficulties, and the proactive nature of what you're doing in your daily life to actually try and advance a better future. So thank you for that. And it's good, I think, to see that people from different places are trying to improve the situation. And again, as you mentioned, without resolving politics, there is a limit to what we can advance. So I hope the political resolution will also follow and come quick. But until that happens, let's continue this good work on regional environmental cooperation and see more of that happening. So thank you for all of you for being here with us today. Thank you to MEI, and thank you for the audience who've been listening and watching.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.